Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. This one will be a little bit different, as I will be including not one, not two, but three planes. And you probably already know which ones these are because you clicked on this video. I'll put timestamps in the description so you can skip to a certain chapter if you're only interested in one plane. The first aircraft of the video is the F-4EJ Phantom II, which is considered one of the worst planes in this tier. Well, that isn't far from the truth, and the performance nicely explains that. You get an average top speed and an okay stall speed. However, these two stats alone don't hinder your performance too much. The optimal speed is slightly higher than optimal because of the not so good energy retention. Things start becoming less sigma with the thrust-to-weight ratio and turn rate. Both are abysmal, the turn rate being the lowest in this tier. The stock turn rate is comparable to the one of the Starfighter, which should already say a lot. This plane is a terrible dogfighter, and if you go past the merge, you're not surviving unless a teammate comes to help you. But we all know that never happens. So, the performance is pretty bad. Will it at least redeem itself with its offensive armament? Not really. It doesn't have an internal gun, which means you'll have to carry an external gun pod, which hinders your performance. The gun itself in the gun pod is a 20mm Colt Mark 11 Mod 5, which is actually pretty decent, but getting your nose on target is another thing. However, if you can aim well and get a couple good hits, the enemy plane should disassemble itself. The best ammo belt is the air targets belt. Lastly, the countermeasures. You get 60 in total, 30 flares and 30 chaff. Not the most, but it will be enough to allow you to rearm at your airfield. The F-4EJ is able to equip 4 different missiles, and the first one I'll cover is the AIM-9G. It's this plane's stock infrared guided missile. Being rear aspect only, it already limits its launch capabilities. It also doesn't have the highest G-pull, meaning you'll have to be somewhat aligned with the enemy if you want it to hit. The range is pretty decent, so if you're able to sneak behind an enemy, you can surprise them with an AIM-9G. The flare resistance is mediocre. In medium to long ranges it's easily flared. In close range shots it's still flareable, but the enemy might have to try a bit more. Luckily, you're not limited to the AIM-9G when it comes to the infrared missiles you can equip, as you're also able to carry the AIM-9L, a 40G, all-aspect infrared heat-seeking missile. It's not the best IR missile in this tier, but it can be extremely useful. It has a good max G-pull and good range, allowing you to fire at unsuspecting targets from a longer range. The F-4EJ also has a head-mounted display, or HMD, allowing you to lock onto an enemy by just looking at him. This can be extremely useful in situations where you can't get a radar lock. Overall, a very nice missile to have. The AIM-7E2 is the first semi-active radar homing missile of the video. The F-4EJ can carry 6 of them if you decide not to take any IR missiles. This AIM-7 is pretty mediocre, having a short but strong booster gives it decent performance in head-ons, and that's the only place where it should be fired. Long-range shots are a guaranteed miss unless the enemy simply flies straight. This missile also has tracking problems in rear aspect shots and below average guidance, allowing the enemy to dodge it more easily. Overall, this missile isn't the worst, but there's definitely better options. Only use it if you have no upgrade points or if you want a challenging match. If you have some spare upgrade points, I highly recommend that you get the AIM-7F, the better radar missile this plane can carry. Unlike the AIM-7E2, it has a much better booster which also gives it more range. However, this missile is heavier, and because the booster produces less thrust in its initial stage, the acceleration is noticeably worse, which can be an issue in head-ons. It has the same problems in rear aspect shots, and with the below average guidance, this missile should still only be fired in head-ons, but you can get away with some long-range kills if the enemy doesn't notch, of course. Here are some recommended loadouts. For the first 2 loadouts, you can decide if you want to take 4 IR missiles and 4 radar missiles, or 2 IR missiles and 5 radar missiles. The last loadout can be used in lobbies with low amounts of players. The reduced missile count affects your performance less. If you don't have a certain combination, use your best IR missiles and best radar missiles. The radar this plane gets is pretty mediocre. It has an above-average Doppler filter, which makes it easier for the enemy to notch your radar. The range is pretty good, but as soon as the enemy starts flying away from you, you will not be able to lock him anymore, unless he's close to you. The search cone is average. This radar only has an STT mode or hard lock, which pings your enemy's RWR. The lack of a TWS mode would usually be a problem for radar-assisted infrared missile launches, but the presence of an HMD eliminates the need for a TWS mode. Now I'll jump scare you with a giant wall of text explaining how to use the RWR that's present on the F-4EJ. You can pause the video to read the whole thing. So how should you play the F-4EJ? Thanks to your poor performance, you'll have to fly it defensively, not dogfighting anyone and avoiding large groups of enemies. You'll get a decent amount of your kills by third-partying. Some players might hate you because of that, and if they complain, simply say, skill issue. Last thing we have to do is place it on this tier list. So, where would I place it? It's obviously gonna go in S tier. No, I'm just kidding. It's going straight into F tier. I would maybe put it to D tier, but if this is your first tier 7 plane, the somewhat lacking armament and terrible performance will make flying this plane a painful experience. If you can, avoid it. Phantom FG.1 is the only British Tier 7 plane. It's an export version of the F-4EJ, so it will have some similarities, and one of those similarities is the performance. Most of the stats are similar if not the same. The only two exceptions are the lower top speed and much higher thrust-to-weight ratio. The reason for the higher thrust-to-weight ratio is because of the improved engines that had been installed on it. This noticeably improves its performance over the F-4EJ, but the turn rate is still the exact same. For this tier, the performance is still a bit lacking, but it's not as bad as the one of the F-4EJ. The offensive armament of the FG.1 is also improved. However, just like the F-4EJ, it doesn't have an internal gun, meaning it will have to carry an external gun pod, which drastically reduces your performance. It is true that this gun pod is really good, having an amazing 1200 total rounds, which is the most in this tier. The gun in the gun pod is the 20mm M61 Vulcan, so you can expect it to deal a lot of damage. The best ammo belts are the Tracer and Multi-Purpose Belt. You can test both out and see which one suits you more. When it comes to the countermeasures, you get a total of 90, 30 flares and 60 chaff, which is 30 more than on the F-4EJ. You drop one flare and one chaff at a time, so this amount is more than enough to engage multiple enemies and re-arm at your airfield. I've already covered the AIM-9G, so if you want to, you can go back to it. The timestamp will be displayed on your screen. I've also already covered the AIM-9L, but unlike the F-4EJ, this plane doesn't have a head-mounted display, so some stuff I said doesn't apply to this plane. So, the AIM-9L is an all-aspect infrared heat-seeking missile. It has a very good G-pull and good range, allowing you to fire it at unsuspecting targets from long ranges. It also has radar slaving, which allows you to get some funny off-bore launches which almost always surprise the enemy. But don't expect it to pull as hard as an R-73. If fired from too close in a head-on, it will simply not gain enough speed to pull into the target. It's also easily flared in a head-on. However, in close rear aspect shots it's much harder to flare, requiring the enemy to cut their afterburner and drop many flares. The best infrared missile the FG.1 is able to carry is the AIM-9M. It has an all-aspect infrared heat seeker with IRCCM, which noticeably improves its flare resistance. This makes it very hard to flare in rear aspect shots. The performance is the same as on the AIM-9L, so the launch capabilities are the same. Some of you may be wondering how the IRCCM works, which is what I'll explain now. First, we must know what the yellow and green circle mean. The yellow circle represents the missile's field of view and the green circle represents the enemy's heat signature. Currently, the missile is tracking the enemy normally. Most likely, the enemy will flare, so now there's another heat source in the missile's field of view. If this was a normal IR missile, it would go after the flare, but the AIM-9M doesn't do that. Instead, it locks its seeker and uses inertial guidance to go where it thinks the enemy will go. Once there's no more flares in the missile's field of view, it unlocks its seeker and continues tracking the enemy. And if the enemy doesn't flare again, he'll end up in this situation. The first semi-active radar homing missile you can purchase is the AIM-7E. It's very similar to the AIM-7E2, which I've covered earlier in this video, with the exception of the mass, which is 12 kilograms higher. This increase in weight makes it accelerate slightly slower and makes it a bit less maneuverable. It should still only be fired in head-ons, from around 5 kilometers. Firing it from long range will just waste your time and your missile. Also make sure you don't fire it from too close, or the missile won't pick up enough speed to efficiently maneuver and hit its target. This missile has problems tracking in rear aspect shots, so if you can, try to avoid firing it while behind an enemy. You have IR missiles for those shots. The Skyflash is the second and better radar missile you can purchase for the FG.1. Performance-wise, it's the same as the AIM-7E2, being slightly lighter than the AIM-7E and having the same short but powerful booster. The guidance on this missile is improved over the AIM-7E, being able to track in any aspect shot, including rear aspect. This is a very welcome upgrade, but because of the somewhat short range it won't really be used that much. This missile should only be fired in head-ons from around 4 to 5 kilometers and close-range rear aspect shots. If you have some spare upgrade points laying around, definitely buy this missile. I can't forget about the recommended loadouts. The first loadout consists of the worst IR and radar missiles available on the FG.1, the second one consists of the best missiles, and the final one consists of a reduced amount of missiles for smaller lobbies or if you want better performance. If you don't have a certain combination, always equip your best IR and radar missile. The radar on the Phantom FG.1 is a slightly improved version of the radar present on the F-4EJ. Despite the improvement, this radar is still pretty mediocre for this tier, having an above-average Doppler filter of 57 meters per second, decent detection range, which is still abysmal in rear aspect, an average search cone and only one mode, STT or hard lock. Overall, not the best radar, but it's good enough to reliably guide radar missiles in head-ons. The RWR on the FG.1 is the same as on the F-4EJ. You can skip to the timestamp displayed on your screen to learn how to use it. Last thing I'll mention before moving on to the gameplay is the playstyle. Thanks to your terrible turn rate, you'll want to play defensively. That means no dogfighting and no flying into large groups of enemies unless they're slow and busy with your teammates. Try to use the terrain to sneak behind the enemy and then surprising them with a missile. If you end up in a head-on, I highly recommend that you crank. You do that by either turning left or right. This increases the distance the enemy's missile has to travel. Make sure you don't lose your radar lock unless you think the enemy's missile will hit first. Now let's place the Phantom FG.1 on this tier list. Being a slightly better F-4EJ, I'll put it into D tier. For this tier, it's still a pretty bad plane, but the improved performance and better missiles definitely make the grind a bit less painful. If you want to get the British Eurofighter or Tornado F3, and aren't good in tier 7, maybe stick to tier 6 or 5 until you get either. The F-4EJ is a Japanese Tier 7 plane. It's the third and last plane of the video. But will it be the best one? First, let's take a look at its performance. Being a Phantom, it's pretty bad. This one has an average top speed and average stall speed. Because of your below average energy retention, you'll have trouble maintaining your optimal speed. This paired with the lowest thrust to weight ratio in its tier, make you lose a lot of speed when trying to notch or outmaneuver a missile. The turn rate is once again the lowest in this tier, so you're still unable to dogfight anyone. Only good thing about it, performance-wise, is the good roll rate, which is always nice to have. The offensive armament on this plane is pretty good for this tier. You finally get an internal gun, which eliminates the need for an external gun pod. This is good because gun pods noticeably worsen your performance. The gun itself is the 20mm M61 Vulcan. This gun is very good, having a high rate of fire and dealing a lot of damage. If the gun is fully upgraded, you get 640 rounds, a decent amount which can kill multiple players. The best ammo belts are the Tracer and Multi-Purpose Belt. Test both out and see which one you like more. The amount of countermeasures is also good. You get a total of 90, 30 flares and 60 chaff, which is more than enough to allow you to survive multiple engagements and return to the airfield. I've already mentioned a couple missiles that this plane can carry. I'll put timestamps on your screen if you want to go back to them. One of the missiles I have not mentioned is the AIM-9P, this plane's stock infrared missile. It's an export version of the AIM-9J. This missile has infrared rear aspect targeting, meaning you'll have to be behind an enemy if you want to acquire an IR lock. This can be a bit difficult as you'll be fighting most people in head-ons. The range of this missile is around 4 kilometers, so you'll have to get pretty close to the enemy if you want it to hit. The flare resistance is okay. In close range shots, the enemy will have to cut their afterburner to successfully flare the missile. You can also fire it at unsuspecting targets and it will have a high chance of hitting, if it's not fired from too far away of course. Overall, not the best missile, but for a stock missile it's good enough. The AAM-3 is a Japanese-produced infrared all-aspect heat-seeking missile. It's the best IR missile this plane can equip, and it's, at least in my opinion, one of the best IR missiles in this tier. The reason for that is the high max G-pull, which allows you to get funny off-bore shots. You also get an IRCCM, which I'll explain how it works shortly. The range of this missile is pretty good. It's comparable to the one of the AIM-9L or AIM-9M. However, in long-range shots it's easily flared, so unless you're certain the enemy is a rank 1 premium, you shouldn't be firing it from these ranges. Where this missile shines is in close-range shots, where the small field of view makes this missile very hard to flare. If fired from extremely close, it's a guaranteed kill. The IRCCM present on the AAM-3 is not the same as on the AIM-9M and Magic 2. This one is called field of view narrowing, which basically means that the closer the missile is to the enemy, the smaller the field of view will be. So, as you can see, the field of view, which is represented with the yellow circle, is becoming smaller and smaller the closer it gets to the enemy. If the enemy won't flare again, he'll get sent back to the hangar. Here's a short guide on how to flare an AAM-3, you can pause the video to read the full text. The only radar missile available for the F-4EJ that I still haven't covered is the AIM-7M. This plane's best semi-active radar homing missile. It's also one of the best radar missiles in this tier. It has a good max G-pull, which makes it very hard for the enemy to dodge it. The good guidance also contributes to that. This missile has no problems in rear aspect shots, where the previous two missiles have trouble tracking. Just like any other SAR missile, it shouldn't be fired from too far away or you'll give the enemy plenty of time to notch. You also shouldn't fire it from too close or the missile won't pick up enough speed to efficiently maneuver. A good launch range is somewhere between 4 to 7 kilometers. In rear aspect shots it can be fired from 1 kilometer and it will still hit the target. I highly recommend that you get it as it will make grinding in this thing much better. Here's a couple recommended loadouts. The last one can be used in small lobbies to improve your performance. If you don't have a certain combination, always equip your best IR and radar missiles as shown in these loadouts. The radar on the F-4EJ Kai is very good. It has a below average Doppler filter which makes it harder for the enemy to notch your radar. The max detection range is also improved, having no problems tracking in front, side or rear aspect shots. The search cone is average. You only get one mode, STT or hard lock. It would be nice to have a TWS mode but you can't have everything. This plane gets the ANALR69 RWR. It's a very good RWR which allows you to easily notch the enemy's radar or radar missile. As long as you remember everything that's written here, you should have no problem reading this RWR. The playstyle is almost the same as with the previous two planes of the video. You can pause the video to read the full thing but I basically copy-pasted the full text and changed a couple words to not make it completely identical. So, where would I put the F-4EJ? I'll put it into C tier. Some might not agree with this because, after all, it's a Phantom. But the missiles it can carry are very good. The same can be said for the radar and RWR. So those were the 3 F-4s of Tier 7. I still don't know how I managed to make a 3-week project in 2 weeks. Anyways, before I finish this video, I'd like to thank It's Me for wasting €1 a month to be a channel member. He can now say he's the biggest fan. With that said, I thank you for watching this very long video and I'll see you soon.